The new Chancellor of the Exchequer is called Rishi Sunak. He has had a meteoric rise through the Conservative Party ranks, wasn't particularly well known, hasn't been an MP that long. He's 40 years old, so relatively young, but he does have a solid background in that he studied politics economics at Oxford University, and then he went on to work for a hedge fund and for Goldman Sachs. So certainly he has a lot of experience in finance.
So then, as he's now laying the groundwork here, what does this budget tell us about the Prime Minister's economic goals and priorities?
Well, Boris Johnson absolutely loved infrastructure when he was Mayor of London, and that is again what he has gone for here in terms of how he wants to spend government money. That's his goal in terms of stimulating the economy and, you know, getting real results for the spending he does in terms of new hospitals, schools, railways, that kind of thing.
So what stood out to you as the budget highlights, not just for Britons, but also for British businesses as well?
Well, I think we have to, first of all, split this budget out because, of course, it's the first budget of a new government. It's setting the path for the next 5 years of Parliament. But, of course, there's then been this shock in the form of the coronavirus. So there's kind of two halves to the budget, the short-term measures on the virus and then the longer-term ones. If we talk about those longer-term ones and you ask about business, they're going to see some benefits in terms of reliefs on tax rates, that kind of thing. But there was actually quite a lot kind of against business because there, for example, were reducing the amount of entrepreneurs relief. That's for people who sell their businesses. The lifetime allowance is going from £10 million to just £1 million. So it is a bit of a mixed bag for businesses, even though they are getting some short-term help in terms of how to combat the impact from the coronavirus.
And speaking of COVID-19, I mean, obviously this is coming not just as a health concern, but in terms of the disruption when it comes to global supply chains. Just how prominently did this figure in the budget, and how much do we know was allocated for that?
Well, his speech, the Chancellor's speech, lasted just over an hour, and the first half was all about the coronavirus and reassuring both employees and employers that the government was there to help them get through this. They would be spending money on the health service and, of course, trying to reassure people that although an economic hit is coming, the government stands ready to mitigate it. And I would just say that I would expect more measures further down the line as well. He mentioned, the Chancellor, there's a summer statement and an autumn budget. Of course, we don't know exactly how long the virus problems will play out, but certainly that will stay front and centre of what this government is going to do to make sure that this economic hit, which is coming, will be mitigated somehow.
Now, was there anything that you were expecting to see in the budget that didn't come up or didn't really get that much focus?
There was going to be talk of some more, let's say, rebalancing of the economy. So the Conservative Party, they won a huge majority in the last election, but that was down to some people voting for them who had not voted Conservative perhaps their entire lives, certainly not for 20, 30, 40 years. So there was a challenge here, which is we need to keep those voters that lent us their support. That's how Boris Johnson looked at it. So before we had the short-term shock from the virus, there was a discussion about how to restructure the economy. So let's say that some of the richer London-based, southeast of the country, city-type people in the top 1% of the economy, they might see some new taxes, or they might go through some, they might be burned by some taxes where therefore they could redistribute to more of the middle class and the bulk of people in the economy. Now, that didn't really quite come out in this budget because, as I say, the Chancellor had to spend at least half of his time just on the short-term shock of the coronavirus. And
just quickly, what are going to be the next steps in really implementing this budget?
Well, it's going to take up quite a lot of civil service time to get these measures out there. I would also say that significantly today, the Bank of England, the central bank, also came out with its own measures, not just an interest rate cut, but also a term lending facility so that banks will lend up to 4 years to small and medium-sized enterprises, again to battle the coronavirus impact. And banks themselves, there was a release of their counter-cyclical buffers, so they can use up some of the capital they stored for a rainy day. Of course, that rainy day now seems to be upon us. So in terms of actually quickly implementing parts of this budget, actually those measures on the banking side will be the quickest to put into action. But I would also say that there will be immediate changes to things like sick pay. That means people get it the first day they start to isolate themselves if they're feeling the effects of the virus. That is straight away going to come into action. They won't have to wait several days, as was the case under the previous regime. So I think there are some measures that will go immediately into place.